Jed Stone's best known now for his talents as a garden designer, but he and his wife Helena ran a highly successful jewelry business in the 1990s, which brought them fame and high living. Then they lost it all, and some years later bought a derelict house, which they renovated, and now together they've created a garden. They join me in the studio today. You do seem to do most things in partnership, like the jewelry business, but using Jed's name. Why is that? Helena?
Well, this is a bit of a bone of contention, actually. We have a friend in PR who said, "You have a great name, Jed Stone. People would pay a fortune for such a good name." But sadly, at the time, it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't get the credit for what we do, and that does get to me sometimes. But there again, I'm very bad at putting myself forward. People see Jed as a figurehead, which is fine, actually, because I don't enjoy being recognised or get any thrill out of that. Whereas Jed loves it.
Is that right, Jed?
Obviously, I'd love to say no, I don't, but yeah, I do. Even as a child, I thought it must be marvellous to walk down a street and have people know who you were. Ironically, that's the worst of it now. It would be nice just to go and buy a paper without somebody saying something, but I suppose I do like being a public figure. Gives me a sense that I've done something people appreciate. It doesn't stop me doing anything, but it does modify how I do it.
But Helena, you did appear on our television screens briefly as a presenter on the travel show. That must have been a dream job, traveling around the world?
Actually, I thought I was being heroic taking that job. I'd actually rather have gone down a coal mine. It was ironic, really, because Jed adores travelling, whilst I hate it. The timing was critical, though. I mean, we were living in this derelict house. We'd knocked huge holes in the walls to make windows, and we could hardly afford to get the job finished. And I wanted to be there when it was done. So I genuinely didn't want to do the job they were offering, but I felt I had no choice because, apart from anything else, it would provide us with a reasonable income.
So what about this jewel garden? Did you have a clear idea of what you wanted to do when you bought the house?
Not at all. In fact, we were provoked into action. I was giving a lecture on gardening, and I was including some snaps of our own wilderness to show what certain plants looked like. But these photos hadn't loaded onto my laptop properly, and you couldn't see a thing. So I started to make it all up, describing this jewel garden with magical colours. It came straight out of my imagination. Hadn't been a long-term plan or anything. Anyway, as soon as I'd finished, these journalists came rushing up saying, "We must come and take pictures of your jewel garden." And I heard myself replying, "Fine, but come when the colours are good. Don't come now." To cut a long story short, we had to make the jewel garden before they came. And actually, we did 90% of the work that summer. That was our incentive.
And why did you call it a jewel garden? Having read about the disasters with the jewelry business, one would have thought you wouldn't want the word jewel in your house at all.
Well, I like to work on projects, and if you have a project where you're thinking only of jewel colours, then that starts to limit you, and design is all about reduction. Really, it was just a good, positive way of tackling what plants we were putting in and the way we were going to design the garden, wasn't it, Jed?
Yeah, but for me it was also partly a metaphor. It's making something worthwhile out of a failure. We did spend years doing the jewellery, and it wasn't all disastrous. There were good things about it too, and we wanted to salvage them and treasure them. It seemed a waste not to take that bit of our lives and to somehow incorporate it into our new design venture, to take the bad experience and use it in a creative way.
Jed and Helena, thank you for telling us about it today.
Part 2.
Last year, I found myself flying to the Arctic Circle with 5 biologists from the Canadian Wildlife Service. As our small plane descended towards a snow-covered runway, I looked out of the window at the frozen ocean below. I could see small holes in the ice, and around them lots of extraordinary little figures rather like ants. I was told they were seals, basking on the ice in the sun. 10 minutes after we'd landed, I had my first sighting of a wolf, which my eagle-eyed colleagues pointed out to me, at least 700 metres away. And later on, I was lucky enough to see a caribou with its huge antlers at much closer range. At first sight, the Arctic seems to be a kind of desert, but there are plants and animals around. You just have to look around for them. You may find what's called an oasis. This is a little confined area with access to water, where vegetation can establish itself and provide nutrients for animals. Arctic plants have evolved to cope with this harsh environment, like the yellow Arctic poppy, which only has a tiny tuft of leaves visible, as the bulk of the plant, a network of roots, stays underground. Its leaves remain green all winter, so it can make the most of the short growing season. The diversity of bird species decreases as you travel north, but there are birds which spend the winter here, and others that come back in the spring. Most of these birds get their nourishment from seeds, although a predator like the snowy owl feeds on small mammals called lemmings, and others do manage to find fish. For accommodation, we had tents which looked just like the igloos the local Inuit people build out of ice, with little tunnels at the front, only ours were orange and made of nylon, and our only connection to the outside world was our radio link. You notice how light the snow cover is. It scatters with the wind, and there are hardly any deep drifts. Apart from the cold, the main hazard is the wildlife, and I received a brief introduction on the correct action to take if a polar bear came to visit. There are other large animals, like the muskox, but they seldom pose a threat. Another thing was that recording the team's descriptions of wildlife, which was my task, was incredibly difficult. The recorder itself was fine, but batteries just don't work in the cold, so I had to hold them inside my thick coat to keep them warm. But on the whole, I found it a fairly amazing...
Part 3. It seems only fitting that former construction engineer Roger Moffat should have used his redundancy money to change direction and break into Hollywood, creating special effects for film and television, for, by his own flamboyant admission, he's no conventional engineer but a born performer who loves an audience. Do you remember a certain car commercial in which the car was driven down the side of a skyscraper? The building facade and windows were built by Roger's own company for a daring stunt whose trade secret he will not divulge. He also constructed sections of a bridge for the film Mary Riley, which starred Julia Roberts and John Malkovich. So, Roger, how did it all start?
Well, about 10 years ago, I had a heart bypass operation, and about the same time, I was made redundant. I was feeling pretty low at the time, so I decided that the only thing to do was to take my working life into my own hands and set up my own business.
And what kind of success did you have in the early days?
You could say it was a bit like taking a roller coaster ride and wondering when you were going to come flying off at breakneck speed. Everything was a challenge. Finance, production, marketing.
But that's all in the past. You're apparently much sought after now. I hear forthcoming film productions are queuing up for your services.
Some, yes. There's no doubt that we're certainly growing rapidly, but we're still small. And I think it's probably important to remain that way. I've seen too many organisations just grow, and in the end, they finish up overreaching themselves, stretching themselves to the limit.
And do you have any regrets about the way things have gone, about the way your life has taken a different turn?
To be honest, none at all. I feel that I've escaped being a slave to a regular income, from commuting, from having to justify my actions to everyone, from having to attend the office party, from having to book my holidays in advance. Actually, I don't have any holidays at all at the moment, come to think of it. I'm too busy. But best of all, I've nothing to do with office politics.
Probably the biggest advantage of all. So, what's the secret of your meteoric rise?
Oh, I couldn't have done anything without the support of my wife, Lily, who's also my business partner. And there's our two daughters, of course, Natasha and Katya. They've all been wonderful.
So, what kind of job did you start out doing?
I graduated in mechanical engineering and then spent about 20 years in industry. Then my job, I was the chief engineer in an air conditioning firm, just disappeared overnight. Anyway, after that, I set up my own computer-aided system that makes really intricate architectural models.
And you also supply components for the aerospace industry, don't you?
We do, but I have to admit that it's the film work that really interests me most.
Do you worry about the future?
Oh, no more than anyone else. I mean, there's no job security anywhere these days, is there? Of course, it's a risk running your own company, but then you're equally as vulnerable staying employed. I decided it was safer to be in charge of my own show than to be a part of someone else's. Well, naturally, I've had problems. We had to sell the family house, the one I built myself. But looking back, it all seems worth it. I was always infuriated by having to justify myself to people whom I didn't consider to be my intellectual superiors.
How would you describe yourself? What are your strengths and weaknesses?
I think I'm a bit of an oddball character, really. I suppose you might say that I was a hard-headed romantic. I believe that an engineer has to invent ideas. You need to be very talented. You need to have a feeling for balance and form. You also need to feel you have status and that people value what you're doing. I've always seen engineers as sort of visionaries, if you like. Engineering can give you great power, a position in the world. And if you don't look after your engineers, then you're in great danger of losing your prestige, your position. Engineering's still the workshop of the world in every country. We've built superb ships, motorbikes, motorcars. Now we're entering a new phase with new challenges.
And what about the tools of your trade? How do you view those?
To me, mechanical things are magical. A motorcar is a thrilling bit of science. The microchip is a masterpiece of theoretical design. Machines of unbelievable complexity make them. But, from my point of view, the most rewarding thing of all is that all these things are designed by engineers.
You certainly seem to have a passion for your profession. I think the mystique of the film world will be pretty safe in your hands. Thanks for coming to talk to us today, Roger.
Part 4.
Hello, I'm Kate Asadi and I'm here to talk about my hobby, which is skydiving. So, why do people want to jump out of a plane? In the UK, this is still seen as something done by crazy young people. But in the USA, skydiving is a hobby that has been taken up by people from all age groups, by anyone looking for excitement, from 20-year-olds to people enjoying an active retirement. I wanted to do skydiving as a teenager, but my parents weren't very keen on the idea and wouldn't give their permission. So my first jump was as a university student, when I was able to get a discount. Immediately, I was hooked. I couldn't afford to do it regularly, though, until I started working as a lawyer. Why do I do it? Well, skydiving makes you feel great. You forget all your problems. There aren't really any health benefits, although I know several business executives with stressful jobs who do skydiving to help them relax. Of course, some people start skydiving to help them get over a fear of heights. If they can face up to their fear and jump out of a plane at a height of 3,000 metres, it helps them to build up the confidence to tackle other things. So, how do you start? The equipment for skydiving is specialised and not easy to get in local sports shops. Nowadays, most people buy skydiving kit from websites. There's more choice and you can see photographs. Though when you're buying second-hand on the internet, you should ask to see the equipment first. I got my skydiving camera that way, and last week I got a helmet with a 50% discount. You need a good helmet, by the way. It's the most important part of your equipment. For your first skydive, you jump from a height of over 3,000 metres, strapped to an instructor who's required to have done at least 2,000 jumps before. You dive down in free fall for 30 seconds, and when the parachute opens, you float down sedately, landing very gently. After that, most people can't wait to have another go. Still nervous? Don't worry. All trainee skydivers must wear an appliance known as the automatic parachute. It's compulsory, so even if you black out, your parachute will still open on its own. These rules are for safety reasons. So, what's stopping you? If you're interested, you need to get in touch with the Parachute Association, and you'll find the contact details through your local airport. They'll give advice on how to get started. You can learn to skydive over a weekend. but I suggest the best way is to do it over several months. That allows you to build up your confidence gradually. Skydiving's great. It'll give you a whole new outlook on life.